March 24th, 2015. Barcelona, Spain. It's a Tuesday morning. Germanwings. Flight 9, 525 is scheduled to depart at 10:01 a.m. Destination, Düsseldorf, Germany. Flight time, just under 2 hours. Routine, completely routine. I've spent the last 3 weeks researching this flight, reading every document I could find. The full BEA report, that's the Bureau d'Enquête et d'Analyse, the French Aviation Authority. All 150 pages. The German prosecutor's files, witness statements, cockpit voice recorder transcripts. And the more I learned, the more disturbing it became. Because what happened on this flight wasn't an accident. It wasn't mechanical failure. It wasn't terrorism in the traditional sense. What happened was something aviation regulations never anticipated. The threat wasn't outside the cockpit. The threat was inside it. Let me introduce you to the two pilots. Captain Patrick Sondenheimer, 34 years old. He'd been flying for Lufthansa and Germanwings for over a decade. 6,000 flight hours, experienced, competent. By all accounts, an excellent pilot, father of 2 young children. His colleagues described him as calm under pressure, professional, the kind of pilot you'd want flying your plane. And then there's Andreas Lubitz, 27 years old, the co-pilot. He'd joined Germanwings in 2013, just 2 years before this flight. Total flight hours, around 900. Still relatively new, but he'd passed all his certifications, completed his training. Nothing in his official record suggested any problems. But here's what I found when I started digging deeper. And this is where the story gets dark. Andreas Lubitz had a history that Lufthansa didn't fully know about, because in Germany, there are strict patient confidentiality laws. What a doctor knows about you stays private, even if you're a pilot, even if you're flying planes full of people. I found medical records that were leaked to German newspapers during the investigation. Lubitz had been treated for severe depression in 2009, before he even started pilot training. He'd been declared temporarily unfit, but he recovered, or seemed to. He passed his psychological evaluations, got his license, started flying. But in the months before March 24th, 2015, something changed. His girlfriend later told investigators he'd been having trouble sleeping, nightmares, mood swings. He'd been seeing doctors, multiple doctors. And here's the critical detail. On March 10th, 2015, just 2 weeks before this flight, a psychiatrist declared him unfit to work, gave him a medical note, told him he shouldn't be flying. But Lufthansa never saw that note, because Lubitz didn't tell them. He ripped it up, threw it away, and kept flying. I also found his internet search history. The German Federal Police recovered his laptop and phone, and what they found disturbed everyone involved in the investigation. In the week before March 24th, Lubitz had been searching for information about suicide methods, about cockpit door security systems, about whether cockpit doors could be opened from the outside. This wasn't a sudden breakdown. This was planned. And that realization, when I first read it in the prosecutor's report, made my stomach turn. Because it means that on March 24th, when Andreas Lubitz showed up for work, when he shook hands with Captain Sondenheimer, When he did his pre-flight checks, he already knew what he was going to do. Flight 9, 5, 2, 5. Boards normally. 144 passengers, 2 pilots, 4 flight attendants, 150 people total. The passengers are a mix. Business travelers heading back to Germany, tourists, families. There's a group of 16 high school students from a town called Halton am See. They'd been on a study abroad trip to Spain, learning Spanish, seeing Barcelona. They were excited to get home. I looked up their names. I know I shouldn't have, but I wanted to know who they were. They weren't just numbers. They were kids, 15, 16 years old. And when I read interviews with their parents later, talking about how their children texted them from the airport, saying they'd see them that evening, I had to stop reading for a while. There was also a baby on board, 7 months old, the youngest victim. I won't say the name out of respect for the family, but when you're researching something like this, these details hit you. This wasn't some abstract disaster. This was 150 individual lives. People with families, with plans, with futures. The plane pushes back from the gate at 10:01 a.m., right on time. Captain Sondenheimer is in the left seat. He's the pilot in command. Lubitz is in the right seat, handling co-pilot duties. The cockpit voice recorder starts recording. It captures everything from this moment on. Every word, every sound, every breath. Takeoff is normal. The Airbus A320 climbs smoothly. Air traffic control in Barcelona hands them off to French airspace as they cross the Mediterranean coast. The weather is perfect. Clear skies, no turbulence. The kind of flight where passengers relax, close their eyes, maybe take a nap. At 10:27 a.m., the plane reaches its cruising altitude, 38,000 feet. The seatbelt sign turns off. Flight attendants begin drink service. Everything is routine. In the cockpit, Sondenheimer and Lubitz go through their cruise checklist. The conversation between them, according to the cockpit voice recorder transcript I read, is professional, normal. Lubitz's responses are brief but appropriate. Nothing seems wrong. And then, at 10:29 a.m., something happens that will determine everything that follows. Captain Sondenheimer says he needs to use the bathroom. This is completely normal. Pilots do this all the time. You can't fly for 2 hours without a bathroom break. The captain unbuckles his seatbelt, stands up. Before he leaves, standard procedure requires a brief handover. He tells Lubitz he's in command. Lubitz acknowledges. The captain opens the cockpit door, steps out. The door closes behind him. Lubitz is now alone in the cockpit, and this is the moment. This is when it starts. At 10:30 a.m. and 53 seconds, according to the flight data recorder, someone in the cockpit, and it has to be Lubitz, because he's the only one there. Someone changes the autopilot setting. The autopilot on an Airbus A320 has a selector for target altitude. It had been set to 38,000 feet, their cruising altitude. At 10:30:53, it's changed. The new setting, 100 feet. That's not a typo. 100 feet. Below sea level in some places. Essentially, the setting you'd use if you wanted the plane to fly into the ground. And then Lubitz does something else. He initiates a descent. The plane starts going down. Not a steep dive, not yet. but a steady descent, about 3,400 feet per minute. The New York Times did a timeline of this flight, published on March 26, 2015. I've read it probably 10 times. They broke down every action, every second. And this descent rate, 3,400 feet per minute, it's significant. It's fast enough that the plane will hit the ground in about 8 minutes, but it's not so fast that it triggers extreme alarms. It's a descent rate that could, to air traffic control, initially look like a controlled descent, maybe preparing for an emergency landing. It wouldn't immediately scream emergency. But inside the plane, people are starting to notice. The flight attendants feel the descent. Passengers feel their ears popping. The angle isn't severe yet, but it's there. Something feels wrong. Outside the cockpit, Captain Sondenheimer finishes in the bathroom. He walks back toward the cockpit door. It's about 10:31 a.m. now. He reaches for the handle, tries to open it. The door doesn't move. He's locked out. Now, let me explain how this door works, because understanding this door is understanding why nobody could stop what happened. After September 11th, 2001, everything changed in aviation. The FAA mandated that cockpit doors be reinforced. The goal was to make them impenetrable, to stop terrorists from getting in. I found the engineering specifications for the Airbus A320 cockpit door. It's not easy to find. You have to dig through technical manuals, but it's there. The door is 3 inches thick, Kevlar reinforced steel. It can withstand 300 pounds of force per square inch. Bulletproof, essentially bomb-proof. There's a locking system with 3 modes: normal mode, unlocked mode, and manual override. In normal mode, there's a security keypad outside the door. If a crew member enters the correct code, the door unlocks automatically after 30 seconds. This is so pilots can get back in if they leave. But, and this is critical, someone inside the cockpit can activate a manual override. It's a simple switch. When you flip it to the lock position, it overrides everything, even the security code. The door stays locked. Period. The system was designed to stop hijackers from using the code to get in. If terrorists somehow got the code, the pilots inside could lock them out permanently. It made perfect sense. In 2001, in the context of external threats. But the regulations never considered that the threat could come from inside, that one of the pilots could lock out the other. That scenario wasn't in the manual. I found an interview with an Airbus safety engineer. It was in a German documentary called Absturz in den Alpen. He said they tested every scenario: axes, explosives, battering rams. The door held against everything, but they never tested. What if the pilot doesn't want the captain back in? At 10:32 a.m., Captain Sondenheimer knocks on the door. The cockpit voice recorder picks this up. Knocking, steady at first, then harder. He's calling out. We don't know exactly what he's saying because his voice is muffled through 3 inches of steel. But we know he's trying to get Lubitz's attention. There's no response from inside the cockpit. Lubitz doesn't say a word, but the cockpit voice recorder is still running. And what it picks up is breathing, steady, calm, even, in and out, like someone sitting quietly, relaxed. air traffic control in Marseille notices the descent. At 10:32 a.m., they radio the plane. This is from the ATC transcript that was released in the investigation. The controller asks Flight 9525 to confirm their altitude. No response. He asks again. Still nothing. The controller's voice becomes more urgent. He's trying multiple times. No answer. This is highly unusual. Pilots always respond to ATC. Always. The only reasons they wouldn't are they're incapacitated or they're dealing with an emergency so severe they can't talk. The controller assumes it's an emergency. He clears the airspace around Flight 9525. Alerts emergency services. Inside the plane, the passengers are scared now. The descent is noticeable. The angle is getting steeper. People are gripping their armrests, looking around, asking flight attendants what's happening. The flight attendants don't know. They're calling the cockpit on the intercom. No answer. One of the flight attendants rushes to the cockpit door. She can hear Captain Sondenheimer pounding on it now, yelling. She tries the emergency code. The door should unlock. It doesn't. The manual override is engaged. The door stays locked. At 10:35 a.m., the ground proximity warning system activates. This is an automated alarm that triggers when a plane is descending toward terrain. It's loud, piercing. The cockpit voice recorder captures it. A robotic voice saying, "Terrain, terrain, pull up, over and over." This alarm is designed to be impossible to ignore. It's meant to snap pilots out of any distraction, any confusion, and force them to react. But Lubitz doesn't react. The alarm keeps blaring, and his breathing, captured on the recorder, stays steady. Calm. In, out, in, out. Outside the door, Captain Sondenheimer is frantic now. The BEA report describes the sounds on the recording. Heavy impacts against the door. He's not just knocking anymore. He's trying to break it down, throwing his body against it. You can hear the thuds. Loud, desperate. I tried to imagine what's going through his mind. He knows the plane is descending. He can hear the alarms through the door. He knows something is catastrophically wrong. And he can't get in. He can't stop it. 3 inches of reinforced steel between him and the controls. At 10:38 a.m., the passengers realize they're going to die. You can hear it on the cockpit voice recorder. The BEA report notes it, screaming. Not just a few people, many people, the entire cabin, men, women, children. It's not continuous. It comes in waves, as the plane drops lower, as they see the mountains through the windows. I read survivor accounts from other disasters, people who came close to death. They describe the screaming as primal, not words, just sound, terror made audible. That's what the investigators heard on the recording, and they noted it in the report with just one word, screaming. That's all it says. But that one word tells you everything. At 10:39 a.m., the plane is at 13,000 feet, descending fast. The French Alps are visible now, jagged peaks, snow-covered, the Massif des Trois Évêchés mountain range, remote, beautiful, and deadly. Captain Sondenheimer is still trying. The sounds on the recorder, according to the investigators who listened to it, are desperate, banging, crashing. He's trying everything. Some reports say he might have been trying to use an emergency axe. Whether that's true or not, we don't know for certain. but the door doesn't budge. At 10:40 a.m., 1 minute before impact, the plane is at 8,000 feet. The mountains are right there. The ground proximity warning is screaming, "Pull up, pull up, pull up." The passengers are screaming. The captain is pounding on the door. And inside the cockpit, Andreas Lubitz sits quietly, his hands on the controls, his breathing steady. The autopilot is guiding the plane toward a mountainside. He doesn't try to pull up. He doesn't say a word. He just sits there, calm. At 10:41 a.m. and 6 seconds, Germanwings Flight 9525 impacts the mountainside at approximately 430 miles per hour. The plane disintegrates instantly. There's no chance of survival at that speed. Everyone dies immediately. All 150 people. The impact crater is about 100 feet wide. The largest piece of wreckage found was the size of a small car. Most pieces were smaller than that, much smaller. The plane essentially vaporized on impact. Debris scattered across the mountain slope, over several square miles. French emergency services are notified immediately, but there's nothing they can do. The crash site is remote, steep, rocky. Rescue teams can't reach it quickly, and when they finally do, hours later, they find exactly what they expected. No survivors, no bodies, just fragments. The investigation begins immediately. This is a major aviation disaster. 150 people dead. The French BEA takes the lead. The German BFU assists. Lufthansa sends investigators. Airbus sends engineers. Everyone wants to know what happened. The first question everyone asks is, was it mechanical failure? The Airbus A320 is one of the most reliable planes in the sky. But planes do fail. Things break. So investigators start looking for wreckage that might show a malfunction. They find nothing. The engines were working fine. The flight controls were intact. The hydraulics were functional. There's no evidence of mechanical failure. The second question is, was it terrorism? Was there a bomb? The wreckage is analyzed for explosive residue. Chemical tests are run. Again, nothing. No bomb. No explosion before impact. The plane hit the mountain intact. Which leaves one possibility, and it's the one investigators don't want to consider. Human action. Someone deliberately flew this plane into the mountain. But who and why? On March 25th, the day after the crash, the cockpit voice recorder is recovered. It's damaged but functional. The data is intact. Investigators begin listening, and what they hear changes everything. The cockpit voice recorder tells the whole story. Every sound from the moment the captain left the cockpit until the moment of impact. The investigators who first listened to it were horrified. Some of them later gave interviews anonymously, describing what it was like. One investigator, speaking to the French newspaper Le Monde, said it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever heard in 30 years of aviation investigation. Because what the recording reveals is intentionality. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't even a hijacking in the traditional sense. This was a pilot, a trained professional, deliberately killing everyone on board, including himself. Let me walk you through what the cockpit voice recorder captured, because the details matter, the timeline matters. This is how we know exactly what Andreas Lubitz did. At 10:29:24, Captain Sondenheimer's voice, telling Lubitz he's leaving the cockpit. Lubitz responds. His voice is calm, normal, professional. He acknowledges. The door opens, sound of it closing. Sondenheimer is gone. Lubitz is alone. At 10:30:53, the flight data recorder shows someone in the cockpit changing the autopilot altitude setting from 38,000 feet to 100 feet. The cockpit voice recorder picks up the sound of the knob turning. Click, 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 down to 100. At 10:31:00, the autopilot begins descending the plane. The vertical speed increases, 3,400 feet per minute. Steady, controlled. Not a dive, a deliberate descent. The flight data recorder shows this was done manually. Someone turned the dial. Someone initiated this. At 10:32, Captain Sondenheimer returns to the cockpit door. Knocking. The sound is clear on the recording. Knock, knock, knock. Steady. Polite at first, like he's just saying, "Hey, let me in." No response from Lubitz. The investigators note this in the report. Not a single word. No acknowledgement. Nothing. And here's what disturbed me. When I read this, Lubitz isn't ignoring a stranger. This is his captain, a colleague, someone he's been working with all morning, someone he shook hands with an hour ago, and he says nothing. At 10:32:30, the knocking gets harder, louder. Sondenheimer knows something is wrong now. He's not asking politely anymore. He's demanding, trying to get Lubitz's attention. Maybe he thinks Lubitz is incapacitated. Maybe he thinks there's a medical emergency. Still no response. But the cockpit voice recorder is picking up something else. Breathing. Lubitz's breathing. The microphone near the co-pilot's seat captures it. And what the investigators heard, what they noted in the report, was that the breathing was normal, steady, calm, not panicked, not distressed, just regular breathing. In, out, in, out. Think about that for a second. Your captain is locked outside. The plane is descending. Alarms are starting to sound. And you're sitting there breathing calmly, like nothing is wrong, like you're meditating. At 10:33:00, air traffic control in Marseille starts calling. The controller asks, Flight 9-5-2-5, to confirm altitude. No response. He tries again. Nothing. Multiple attempts. The recording captures the radio calls. You can hear the controller's voice becoming more urgent, more concerned. But Lubitz never responds. At 10:34, the knocking on the door becomes pounding. Sondenheimer is hitting it hard now. The BEA report describes the impacts as violent. He's throwing his weight against it. You can hear thuds, crashes. He's trying to break through 3 inches of reinforced steel with his bare hands. I found a documentary, I think it was on National Geographic, where they interviewed aviation security experts. One of them said that door was designed to withstand explosives. A human body, even a strong man throwing himself against it, wouldn't even dent it. Sondenheimer had to know this. But what else could he do? He had to try. At 10:35, the ground proximity warning system activates. The robotic voice, terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up. This alarm is loud, piercing, designed to be impossible to ignore. I actually found a video online where someone recorded what this alarm sounds like in an Airbus cockpit. It's terrifying. Even hearing it in a video, knowing I'm safe, it made my heart race. Imagine hearing that and knowing you're in the plane, knowing the ground is coming. The alarm continues, over and over. Terrain, terrain, pull up, and Lubitz does nothing. The flight data recorder shows no attempt to pull up, no change in the descent rate. The plane keeps falling at 3,400 feet per minute, steady, controlled. At 10:36, you can hear the passengers. The BEA report notes this, screaming. It starts faint, distant. The cockpit is soundproofed, so for the recorder to pick up sounds from the cabin, they have to be loud, really loud. The screaming gets louder as the descent continues. I tried to find out who was screaming. Not specific names, but demographics. Were they adults? Children? The report doesn't specify, but we know there were 16 high school students on board. We know there was a baby. Logic tells you everyone was screaming. When you're in a plane descending rapidly toward mountains, age doesn't matter. Everyone is terrified. At 10:37, there's a new sound on the recording. Something metallic. The investigators couldn't identify it conclusively. Some theorized Sondenheimer might have been trying to use something to break the door. An emergency axe, maybe. There are axes on planes for emergency evacuations. Whether he found one, whether he tried using it, we don't know for certain. The BEA report just says metallic impacts against the door. At 10:38, the screaming from the cabin intensifies. The report describes it as many voices, not just a few people, many, men and women. You can distinguish different pitches, different levels of panic. Some people screaming words, some just sounds. There's been a lot of debate about whether the passengers knew they were going to die. Some aviation psychologists. I read an article in Aviation Psychology and Applied Human Factors. They argue that passengers in situations like this enter a dissociative state. Denial. Surely the pilots will fix this. Surely we'll be okay. But by 10:38, looking out the windows, they could see the mountains. Close. Too close. They knew. Maybe not in the first minute. Maybe not when the descent started. But by now, they knew. At 10:39:00, the plane passes through 13,000 feet. The mountains are right there. The terrain warning is screaming. Pull up, pull up, pull up. Sondenheimer is crashing against the door. The passengers are screaming. And inside the cockpit, Lubitz sits silently. His breathing, still captured on the recorder, is unchanged. Calm. I keep coming back to that detail, the breathing, because it tells us something about his mental state. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't having second thoughts. He was calm, in control, executing a plan. At 10:40, 1 minute before impact, the plane is at 8,000 feet. The Massif des Trois Évêchés Mountains fill the view. Steep, rocky, covered in snow. There's a particular mountain called the Pic de Bure. That's where the plane is heading. Investigators would later calculate the exact trajectory. The plane was aimed directly at it. The final 60 seconds. I read the transcript breakdown minute by minute, second by second. The New York Times did this. So did several aviation analysts. Let me tell you what happened. 10:40:00. Altitude 8,000 feet. Descent rate unchanged. Terrain warning continuous. Screaming continuous. Pounding on door continuous. 10:40:15. Altitude 6,500 feet. The mountains are enormous now, filling every window. Some passengers, the ones by the windows, can probably see individual trees, rocks, details. 10, 40, 30. Altitude, 5,000 feet. 30 seconds left. The ground proximity warning changes. It becomes more urgent. 30 seconds to impact. Pull up, pull up, pull up. 10, 40, 45. Altitude, 3,500 feet. 15 seconds. The screaming from the cabin, according to investigators who listened to the recording, reaches a peak. Everyone is screaming now. Everyone who isn't frozen in shock. The sound is overwhelming. 10, 40, 55. Altitude 2,000 feet. 5 seconds. The captain is still pounding, still fighting, still trying. Right up to the last second, he doesn't give up. And inside, Lubitz sits, breathing, calm. 10:41, 06, impact. The recording ends, instantly. 1 second there's sound, screaming, alarms, pounding, breathing. The next second, nothing, just silence. The recorder stops. The plane hit the mountainside at 6,000 feet elevation. The speed at impact was approximately 430 miles per hour. At that speed, the plane doesn't crumple. It doesn't break apart gradually. It disintegrates instantly. Pieces scatter. Metal, plastic, fuel. Everything vaporizes on impact. French emergency services arrive hours later. The crash site is remote. Rescue helicopters have to navigate narrow mountain valleys. When they finally reach it, they find a debris field spread across several square miles. The largest intact piece of wreckage is about the size of a car. Most pieces are smaller, much smaller. I found photos online, not of bodies, those were never released, but of the wreckage. It's hard to even tell it was a plane. It looks like someone took a giant cheese grater to metal. Just fragments, twisted, burned, scattered across a snowy mountainside. Recovery teams work for weeks. They collect every piece they can find: body parts, personal items, plane components. Everything is catalogued, analyzed. DNA samples are taken. Dental records are used. The process of identifying the victims takes months. Some families never got bodies back because there weren't bodies, not intact ones. At that speed, at that force, the human body doesn't survive. It fragments. Families received cremated remains, small amounts, sometimes just a few grams. DNA verified as their loved one, but not a body to bury, just fragments. The investigation focuses on Lubitz. Who was he? Why did he do this? The German prosecutor's office, the Düsseldorf prosecutor specifically, takes charge of the criminal investigation. They raid Lubitz's apartment. They seize his computer, his phone, his medical records, and what they find builds a profile. Andreas Lubitz was born in 1987, grew up in a small town in Germany called Montabaur. By all accounts, a normal childhood. No red flags. He dreamed of being a pilot, wanted it since he was a kid, worked hard in school, got good grades, applied to Lufthansa's training program. But in 2008, during his initial training, he had a crisis, severe depression, suicidal ideation. He was hospitalized briefly. His training was suspended. He underwent psychiatric treatment, spent 18 months recovering. His doctors eventually cleared him, said he was fit to fly. He resumed training, passed all his tests, got his license, started flying commercially, and for several years, He seemed fine. No incidents, no complaints. His colleagues described him as quiet but competent. But in late 2014, about 4 months before the crash, something changed. His girlfriend, who was interviewed by prosecutors, said he started having nightmares, waking up screaming. He became withdrawn, moody. He was seeing doctors again, multiple doctors. And here's where the system failed. Lubitz was doctor shopping. He'd go to one doctor, get a diagnosis he didn't like, and go to another. He saw several psychiatrists, several general practitioners, and on March 10th, 2015, 2 weeks before the crash, one of them declared him unfit to work. The doctor wrote him a sick note, told him not to fly, but German law doesn't allow doctors to inform employers without patient consent. Confidentiality is absolute, so Lufthansa never knew. Lubitz tore up the sick note. Investigators found pieces of it in his apartment trash, and he kept flying. His computer history is chilling. I read the prosecutor's summary. In the week before March 24th, Lubitz searched for suicide methods. He researched different ways to die. He also searched for information about cockpit doors, how they worked, whether they could be opened from the outside, security protocols. He wasn't impulsive. He was planning, researching, preparing, and on March 24th, he executed his plan. The big question everyone asks is, why? Why kill yourself and take 149 other people with you? The prosecutor found no manifesto, no suicide note, no explanation. Lubitz didn't tell anyone his plan. He just did it. Psychiatrists who analyze the case, and there have been several academic papers written about this, they theorize it was a combination of depression and what's called catastrophizing. He'd been declared unfit to fly. His career, the thing he'd worked his entire life for, was over. In his mind, if he couldn't be a pilot, life wasn't worth living. But that doesn't explain why he took 149 people with him. Some psychologists call it extended suicide. The idea that if you're going to die, you want to make a statement. You want the world to feel your pain. It's narcissistic, it's cruel, and it's rare, but it happens. The families of the victims were devastated, not just by the loss, that's obvious, but by the why. How do you process that your loved one died because someone decided to kill themselves and take everyone with them? There's no closure in that. No sense, just senseless evil. Lufthansa faced lawsuits, lots of them. Families argued the airline should have known, should have caught this. The airline countered that German privacy laws prevented them from accessing Lubitz's medical records. Both arguments have merit. It's complicated. Aviation regulations changed after Germanwings 9525. The EU and the FAA both issued new rules. The most significant one is called the two-person rule. It says that if one pilot leaves the cockpit, a flight attendant must enter. So there are always two people in the cockpit. Always. The logic is simple. If one pilot tries to lock out the captain, the flight attendant can unlock the door, or at least try to stop the pilot. It's not a perfect solution. A determined pilot could overpower a flight attendant, but it's better than leaving one person alone with total control. Mental health screening also changed. Airlines are now more aggressive about monitoring pilots' psychological states, regular evaluations, peer reporting systems, anonymous hotlines. The goal is to catch problems before they become disasters. But here's the problem I keep thinking about, and this bothers me. Pilots are still terrified to admit they're struggling, because admitting mental health issues can end your career. The FAA and EASA say they want pilots to come forward, but the system punishes them when they do. I read an article in the Journal of Aviation Psychology. It interviewed dozens of pilots, anonymously, and the overwhelming response was, if I admit I'm depressed, I lose my license, I lose my job, I lose everything. So pilots hide it. They suffer in silence. They self-medicate. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, it ends in disaster. The system is broken. I don't know how to fix it. Smarter people than me are working on it. But until pilots feel safe admitting they need help, we're going to have this problem. Let me take you back to the door, because this is what haunts me most. That door was designed to save lives. After 9/11, reinforced cockpit doors prevented hijackings. They worked. Multiple times, would-be hijackers tried to break into cockpits, and they couldn't. The doors held. Lives were saved. But on March 24th, 2015, that same safety feature became a weapon. Captain Sondenheimer couldn't get in. The flight attendants couldn't get in. Nobody could stop Lubitz, because the door worked exactly as designed. There's an irony in that, a tragedy. We made planes safer from external threats, and in doing so, we made them vulnerable to internal ones. Engineers who worked on the door design have spoken about this. I found an interview with an Airbus safety engineer in a German documentary. He said they never anticipated this scenario. The regulations assumed the threat was outside. After Germanwings, Airbus didn't change the doors, because what would they change? Make them weaker. That defeats the purpose. Make them openable from outside. That brings back the hijacking risk. There's no perfect solution. So we're left with the two-person rule and hope. Hope that screening catches troubled pilots. Hope that the culture changes. Hope that people get help before they hurt others. But hope isn't a system, and 150 people are dead because the system failed. I want to end by talking about the victims, because they're not just numbers. They're not just a statistic. They were people, real people, with names, with families, with lives that mattered. The 16 students from Halton am See, they were sophomores, learning Spanish, excited about their futures. One of them wanted to be a teacher. Another wanted to study medicine. They had dreams, and they died because one man decided his pain was more important than their lives. The 7-month-old baby, too young to even understand fear, just a child, gone. The parents, the siblings, the friends, the colleagues, everyone who loved someone on that plane. They didn't just lose a person, they lost futures, weddings that won't happen, grandchildren who won't be born, conversations that won't occur, all of it stolen. Captain Patrick Sondenheimer, a hero. He fought until the last second, trying to save everyone, pounding on that door, trying to get back to the controls. He couldn't save them, but he tried. That matters. And Andreas Lubitz. I've thought a lot about him. I've tried to understand. Depression is real. Mental illness is real. People suffer, I get that. But there's a line, and he crossed it. Taking your own life is tragic. Taking 149 others with you is evil. This crash changed aviation. It changed how we think about cockpit security, about mental health screening, about the balance between privacy and safety. But none of those changes bring back the dead. So why am I telling you this story? Why spend weeks researching this? Reading reports, listening to analysis, trying to understand? Because we can't let this be forgotten. We can't let 150 people die and just move on. We have to remember. We have to learn. We have to do better. The next time you board a plane, you're trusting your life to the pilots, trusting that they're healthy, that they're stable, that they want to live as much as you do. Most of the time, that trust is warranted. Pilots are professionals. They're carefully screened. They're monitored. 99.9% of flights are safe. But on March 24th, 2015, that trust was broken, and 150 people paid the price. Captain Patrick Sondenheimer tried to stop it. He failed, but he tried. That door, that 3-inch wall of steel, stopped him. Technology designed to protect became an instrument of murder. And on the other side of that door, Andreas Lubitz sat calmly, breathing steadily, flying a plane full of people into a mountain, while they screamed, while they begged, while they died. That's the answer to the question. Why was the captain locked outside while 150 people screamed? Because one man decided it would happen, and the system, for all its safeguards, couldn't stop him.